Coming up on this Monday edition of Newsline at noon, North Korea confirms the ousting of the once powerful uncle of its leader Kim Jong-un from all his posts, accusing Jang Song-thaek of committing criminal acts against the state. South Korea announces an expanded air defense zone overlapping China's recently extended airspace that covers a rock controlled by Korea. Plus, Thai Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra says she will dissolve parliament and call for swift elections after opposition lawmakers quit to back their demand for her resignation. These stories and more on Newsline at noon.
Where's the best place for bibimbap?
Les Jeux Olympiques d'hiver se dérouleront-ils à Pyeongchang?
هل أنتم حقاً سابع أكبر مصدر في العالم؟
この歌手は誰ですか？你好，最近哪部电视剧的人气最旺？
Korea is attracting interest from around the world. The more you know, the more you want to know. Dynamic Korea.
Thanks for joining us. You're watching Newsline at noon. I'm Choi Yusan in Seoul.
Very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. North Korea has confirmed the ousting of Jang Song-thaek, the once powerful uncle of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un.
The announcement, which accused Jang of living a depraved life of corruption, womanizing and drug-taking, came 6 days after South Korea's spy agency reported news of the purge. Our Park Ji-won has the latest.
North Korea's Central News Agency reported early Monday that Jang Song-thaek has been dismissed from every post and expelled from the Workers' Party. The agency's dispatch said the decision was adopted at a Workers' Party Politburo on Sunday. It accused Jang of committing a string of anti-state acts, such as corruption, gambling, and drug-taking that immensely harmed national unity and solidarity. The official announcement comes 6 days after South Korea's spy agency reported the alleged purge of North Korea's second most powerful figure to the National Assembly last Tuesday. South Korea's intelligence agency also said last week that Jang's two aides, Lee Yong-ha and Jang Soo-gil, were believed to have been publicly executed in last November. With the expulsion, South Korean experts say North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's grip on power has tightened. Jang Song-thaek was born in 1946 and married late North Korean leader Kim Jong-il's sister Kim Geunhye in 1972. The couple is known to have been separated for years. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
South Korea has expanded its air defense zone that will partly overlap with similar zones drawn up by China and Japan. Seoul says it consulted with all relevant parties and doesn't expect its decision to cause too much of a stir. Our Kim Myung-gil reports.
Korea's defense ministry has announced that it is extending its air defense zone to cover two small islands and a submerged rock called Yeodo in waters south of the Korean peninsula.
Korea's air defense identification zone has been revised to be in line with international practices and the country's flight information region, which does not overlap with neighboring countries.
The ministry on Sunday said Korea's new expanded air defense identification zone, or KDIZ, coincides with the flight information region that includes the southern islands of Manado and Hongdo, which are controlled by Seoul, as well as Yeodo, a rock claimed by Korea and China and controlled by Korea. The ministry said the new zone will take effect from December 15th. Air defense identification zones are not territorial claims, but they mark the airspace that countries believe are important to monitor. The announcement comes in response to China's decision late last month to create a new air zone that overlaps with those of Korea and Japan, including Korea's Yeodo and a set of disputed islands between Tokyo and Beijing. This unilateral move sparked a backlash from Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington. Seoul said its decision was unlikely to provoke a similar reaction.
We have explained our position to related countries, and overall they're in agreement that this move complies with international regulations and is not an excessive measure.
The U.S. State Department said it appreciates Korea's commitment to implement the new air zone in respect for the freedom of overflight and other internationally lawful uses of international airspace. There was no immediate response from China on the move, but last Friday, Beijing said Korea's expansion would comply with international laws and conventions and that it would stay in communication with Seoul. Kim Jong-un, Arirang News.
Now, with regard to Seoul's announcement that it will expand its air defense zone, President Park Geunhye has said the decision was made after serious deliberations by the related ministries to ensure that Korea's national interest and its status as a sovereign nation are upheld. During a meeting with her top secretaries on Monday, President Park said tension in the Northeast Asian region is rising with the ongoing dispute over air defense zones and the political turmoil in North Korea. She called on the media and experts to refrain from making exaggerated reports or speculation on the government's decision, which could raise public anxiety at a time when the government is trying to calmly respond to the diplomatic and security issues surrounding the Korean peninsula. A newly created parliamentary committee tasked with reforming the state spy agency held its first meeting earlier today, with discussions focusing on how the committee should move forward with its work. Our Kim Jong-un reports.
The 14-member Special Committee on Reforming the National Intelligence Service met for the first time on Monday and elected 5-term Democratic Party lawmaker Jang Song-thaek as its chairman. Last week, the National Assembly endorsed a motion to set up 2 separate committees, one for reforming the spy agency and the other for reforming local politics, which will work on retooling the election system for mayors and the heads of municipal governments. The chairman and floor leaders of the ruling and main opposition parties spearheaded the efforts to create the 2 committees in order to resolve a prolonged impasse at the parliament. The rival parties have broadly agreed to put the NIS Reform Committee in charge of strengthening the parliament's control over the spy agency's budget and activities. But they remain far apart on how to proceed. The main opposition Democratic Party wants to set up strict rules on the agency's involvement in psychological warfare, saying that former NIS Director Won Se-hoon launched an online smear campaign ahead of the 2012 presidential election under the guise of its psychological warfare program, targeting North Korean sympathizers. The ruling Saenuri Party said that limiting the agency in that way will only disable it. The National Intelligence Service has long been at the center of a national controversy, as it is suspected of launching an online smear campaign targeting the opposition candidates ahead of the 2012 presidential election. In related news, a Democratic Party lawmaker on Sunday called last year's presidential election a fraud and urged the government to hold another election next June to elect a new president. Representative Jang Ha-na is the first opposition lawmaker to publicly deny the legitimacy of last year's presidential election, and her remarks have sent shockwaves through the political community.
Representative Jang Ha-na is denying last year's presidential election to make her presence known, as Representative An Chol-soo pushes ahead with forging his own party. That kind of foolish politics will only come back to haunt her.
Representative Jang Ha-na is only speaking about her personal views, which are different from the official stance of the Democratic Party. It's regrettable that she did that.
Kim Jong-un, Arirang News.
Koreans' overseas spending topped $6 billion in the third quarter, a record for a single 3-month period. The Bank of Korea said Monday that overseas spending reached $6.17 billion in the July to September period. That's up nearly 5% from the same quarter last year. Overseas spending includes money spent on overseas trips, tuition for studying abroad, and online shopping. Experts forecast overseas consumption will remain high in the fourth quarter as the holiday season nears. The central bank says high overseas spending has a negative effect on the domestic economy as less money is spent in Korea.
It seems like the Korean government's efforts to clamp down on business activities taking place in the underground economy are paying off. Data provided by the Finance Ministry on Monday shows the government has collected roughly $1.9 billion through September this year from those doing business in the underground economy. That represents more than 70% of the $2.6 billion the government is aiming to collect from the underground economy this year. At this rate of collection, the Finance Ministry expects the government to meet its tax revenue goal from the underground economy in 2013. The Trade Ministry expects a recovery in the local auto industry in 2014 after a fall in both exports and domestic sales this year. Our Yulian reports.
Korea's auto industry is expected to post record exports next year, when domestic auto output is seen rising slightly. The Trade Ministry said on Monday it expects a global auto market to grow by 4.8% in 2014, as Europe is poised to report a turnaround, and China, Russia, Brazil, and other emerging economies will perform better. On top of the greater global demand for automobiles, Korean cars will also enjoy an additional tariff reduction from the Korea-EU Free Trade Agreement, which took effect in July. That will translate into a record high overseas shipment of 3.2 million automobiles next year, up 3.2% from this year. That will also allow a 2% fall in exports this year. Car sales in the domestic markets are also expected to increase slightly as the Korean economy starts picking up speed. Sales of imported cars will lead the rise, with an expected growth of over 14%. The ministry noted, however, that risks remain in and out of the country in view of the nation's ballooning household debt and the U.S. Fed's expected rollback of its huge stimulus program. Yurian, Arirang News.
The U.S. government and global industry are expected to impose trade pressure on Korea after Seoul expressed an interest in joining the Trans-Pacific Partnership. According to diplomatic sources on Sunday, U.S. automobile industries are pressing the Obama administration to discuss allegations of exchange rate rigging and non-tariff barriers if Korea formally joins the TPP. Earlier, American Automotive Policy Council President Matt Blunt said the TPP should ensure current and future TPP members do not use it to undermine market access commitments. He added that a number of domestic policies dealing with labor and competition are creating a very difficult business environment for foreign companies operating here in Korea, saying the US should leverage TPP to ensure Korea fulfills its commitments to create an open economy. It's been almost a year since President Park Geunhye came to power here in Korea, and recent economic figures show the Korean economy under President Park has made better progress than Japan under the leadership of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in terms of current account surplus and growth rate. Our Hwang Ji-ae reports.
Some key indicators show the Korean economy has fared better than the Japanese economy over the last 12 months. The International Monetary Fund expects Korea to continue its gradual pace of recovery by growing 3.7% next year and 2.8% this year. But the IMF forecasts the Japanese economy will lose steam, expanding just 1.2% in 2014 after growing 2% this year. Under that forecast, Korea's economic growth rate will exceed Japan's by 0.8 percentage points this year and 2.5 percentage points next year. Korea's current account surplus in particular is expected to surpass Japan's for the first time this year. Korea is forecast to log a current account surplus of $63 billion for the entire year, according to the nation's central bank, $3 billion more than Japan. Only 5 years ago, Korea was no match for Japan, a major exporting nation with the current account surplus 5 times larger than that of Korea. Analysts, however, point out that the set of economic policies laid out by Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is much more clear-cut than Korea's. They say while Japan pushed hard with its economic program known as Abenomics to defeat deflation, more than 100 pending bills aimed at boosting the Korean economy are gathering dust in Parliament. Hwang Ji-ae, Arirang News.
Korea's railway union members started an indefinite walkout around 3 hours ago at 9 a.m. this morning. The union is strongly opposed to the Transport Ministry and KORail's plan to form a subsidiary to manage new KTX routes departing from southern Seoul. Labour workers argue the government's move will eventually lead to the privatisation of KORail. The negotiations between union workers and management lasted well into Sunday night, but the two sides failed to find middle ground. Railway officials say commuters in Seoul and the metropolitan area should not be that affected, as KTX trains and Seoul subway lines will operate normally. Operations of regular train services such as Semaul and Mugunhwa will drop to 60% of normal levels, and freighter train services will drop to around a third of normal levels.
For your fill of Korean and international news, join Chae Yu-sun and Mark Broom every weekday at lunchtime. Newsline at noon.
Plenary session this Wednesday and vote on the government restructuring bills.
Within the last hour, Thai Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra has said she will dissolve parliament and hold elections as soon as possible after weeks of increasingly volatile anti-government protests. Kwon So-ah has the details.
The future of Thailand and its Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra are now in the hands of the Thai people. Yingluck said on Monday she will dissolve parliament and hold an election as soon as possible. This comes after Yingluck on Sunday proposed holding a referendum amid the intensifying unrest in her country. In a statement beamed across the nation, Yingluck said she was willing to listen to the protesters and was not addicted to her title as the Prime Minister.
If we are still in conflict without finding a solution, I will hold a referendum to determine what the majority of people want.
Her offer came as she rejected protesters' demand to form a People's Council last week, saying it was not constitutional. Shinawatra says her proposal for a referendum does abide by the constitution. On the same day, Thailand's main opposition party said it would walk out of parliament, saying it can no longer work with what it calls an illegitimate government.
To show our firm stance against the illegitimacy of the current parliament, we all, as members of the House of Representatives, are showing our commitment to resign as members of the House of Representatives, effective from today.
Without the Democrat Party, the 500-member lower house will be short by around 150 members. Protesters have been on the streets for weeks and have surrounded government offices in Bangkok, calling for the Prime Minister to step down, accusing her of being a proxy for her exiled brother and former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Pro-Europe protesters in Kiev have toppled a statue of Lenin as thousands continue to protest against the government on its position on Europe and Russia. Kim Min-ji has the details.
In a highly symbolic development, protesters in the Ukrainian capital have knocked down a statue of Soviet state founder Vladimir Lenin. Once the monument fell to the ground, demonstrators decapitated it and attacked it with hammers. Hundreds of thousands had gathered in Kiev Sunday for the protest, dubbed the March of the Million, to express their anger towards President Viktor Yanukovych and to pressure him to reject plans for closer ties with Russia. Protesters waved the flags of Ukraine and the European Union as they continued to protest at Kiev's Independence Square, while others tried to block access to the presidential building. The protests, now into week 3, were sparked by the government's last-minute decision to suspend plans to sign an integration pact with the European Union, which the opposition says was the result of Russian pressure. President Yanukovych said the country was not ready for such move and that the deal would have been too costly for the Ukrainian economy. Sunday's protests were further fueled by a meeting between President Yanukovych and Russian President Vladimir Putin last Friday. The opposition claims the meeting took place as part of preparations to join a customs union led by Moscow. Meanwhile, the European Commission says EU Foreign Policy Chief Catherine Ashton will visit Kiev in the coming days to try and find a way of diffusing the crisis. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
A team of inspectors of the International Atomic Energy Agency have visited Iran's Arak heavy water reactor for the first time in more than 2 years. Iran state media reports that 2 of the IAEA inspectors held their one-day inspection on Sunday and were scheduled to leave for Vienna later in the day. The visit comes just 2 weeks after a 6-month interim deal was reached between Iran and world powers over Tehran's nuclear program. Iran has agreed not to commission or fuel the Arak reactor during that time. Some suspect Iran could attempt to use the reactor for the reprocessing of plutonium, a potential step towards a nuclear weapon.
Around 60 heads of state will attend a memorial service for Nelson Mandela in Johannesburg on Tuesday. Security for the service will be super tight, as some of the world's most powerful people will be in attendance. Those confirmed include US President Barack Obama and Mrs. Obama, former US Presidents George W. Bush, Bill Clinton and Jimmy Carter, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, as well as 13 heads of African states. The Korean delegation will be led by Prime Minister Jang Song-thaek. People around the world are continuing to pay tribute to the anti-apartheid hero who died last Thursday at the age of 95. Now, frigid winds and freezing temperatures are endured by most people during the winter season, but for some who suffer with chronic sinusitis, the onset of the colder weather is a source of runny noses, headaches and sleepless nights. But Korean medical researchers say they may have found the key to unlocking a possible cure. Paulie reports.
32-year-old Han Sung-chung has been diagnosed with chronic sinusitis for the last 8 years or so. Han says he dreads the onset of the winter season as his symptoms take a turn for the worst.
It's been hard to get a good night's sleep. I often wake up and feel sleepy during the day. I can't seem to concentrate. Even at work, I have to keep wiping my nose.
Sinusitis, a condition that leads to painful inflammation of the sinuses, affects nearly 1.9 million people in Korea every year. Current treatments and even surgeries only provide limited relief for symptoms, but a joint medical study here in Korea has recently raised hopes for a potential cure. Researchers discovered that so-called natural killer cells in the body were defective in a group of chronic sinusitis patients between 2003 and 2011.
We found that natural killer cells play an important role in the abnormal immune response that leads to a recurrence of sinusitis. This new discovery is part of very meaningful research.
The goal now is to find a way to repair these damaged immune cells, which are also linked to asthma and blood disorders.
We're moving in the direction of restoring the impaired functions of natural killer cells. If we continue on this path, there's a bright future for effective treatment for chronic sinusitis.
The research findings were published last month in the scientific journal PLOS ONE and provide key knowledge for diagnosing and perhaps treating this chronic condition. Paul Yi, Arirang News.
And time now to get an update on the weather with our Lee Ji-hyun standing by at the Weather Center. Hello there, Ji-hyun.
Well, good afternoon, guys, and good to see you again, Yusan. Now, I hope you had a chance to take an advantage of the nice weather over the weekend, as things will get a lot cooler this week. The highs today will be 2 to 4 degrees lower, and strong gusty winds will make it feel cooler than the readings. And it's been raining since this morning in the western parts of the nation, including here in Seoul, and the rain is gradually spreading to other areas. Now we are expecting up to 5 to 20 millimeters of rainfall, but it will snow in the mountainous area of Gangwon-do, as up to 10 centimeters are expected there. And heavy snow advisory could be issued in this region, so be careful if you live in this area. Now the rain will bring down the temperature starting tomorrow. We will wake up to a freezing morning low of -3 here in Seoul, and the rest of the nation will also wake up to early winter-like morning lows again. But the afternoon highs will be 3 to 5 degrees lower than today, with lots of sunshine. And it looks like we have another band of snow and rain in the forecast for the middle of the week, and it's it's going to get a lot cooler each day. So get ready for the cold weather to return. By the way, the recommended room temperature during the winter is below 18 degrees Celsius with a humidity of 40%. Please keep that in mind, and let's take a look at the readings for today. The high in Seoul this afternoon will peak at 6, Daegu 11, and Gwangju will have a high of 10, while Busan will get up to 15 with a few scattered showers. Now let's see how other regions are looking. It looks like Jeju will have a high of 16 in the afternoon. Daejeon and Dokdo will get up to 9 and 12, while Mount Kumgang will be a chilly sight. Now that's all I have for you today. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and back to Mark and Yusan in the studio.
Thank you very much for the weather there, Gian. And that's it for this Monday edition of Newsline at Noon. Join us again tomorrow for headlines making news here in Korea and around the world.
Don't change that channel. We'll have more news coming your way in the afternoon.